Welcome back, everybody, from our little bit of a vacation. We're still fighting the coronavirus over here, but God willing, we'll get it done. So, tonight's chapter in organizational behavior management is managing. Oh, actually, I downloaded the wrong slideshow. It's not managing behavior. We did managing behavior last class. Tonight's class is going to be different. Let me just get into my inbox and download the right class. Last class is very cool how we looked at people's behaviors. I think that's very, very important. I think that's where we're going to get our final exam stuff. Tonight's chapter is quite long. It's 51 slides. And just let us upload for a moment here. It's going to be on managing individual stress, which is a really, really cool concept. We mentioned in many of my classes, and maybe I mentioned it here also, Simon Sinek, a great management guru, a motivational speaker, talks about the concept of the circle of safety. Circle of safety means it's kind of like an old concept dating back to, if you want to call it prehistory or early man, where somebody would have to guard, at night or during the day when everybody slept, depending on what shift you were on, so that everybody felt safe. So when everyone has mutual support, everybody helps each other at work, people feel comfortable. They feel that they can be creative. They feel that they can just, be able to relax and breathe and do their jobs. When everybody's on edge and people don't trust each other, and there's that lack of a circle of safety, what ends up happening is the body injects something called cortisol, and cortisol is a steroid. And what it does is shuts down. It's a shutdown mechanism. Shuts down your immune system. And it basically allows you to work under a tremendous amount of stress. However, that's not the way it's intended to be all the time. It's like, can you imagine if you're driving a car at high speeds for hours and hours and hours? Imagine driving your car at maximum speed. Let's say you had a straight road. You're driving on the Autobahn, and you're driving your car 150 miles an hour, right, for 5 hours. What do you think is going to happen to your car? Your car is going to break down. So if you're constantly running on full speed and you're constantly running on tremendous amounts of stress, right, it's going to have a terrible impact on you. You're going to become sick. Your immune system will be compromised. You can have either a lot of weight gain from stress, depending if you're a stress eater like me, or people lose weight when they're stressed out. But it really depends on the individual. So tonight's learning objectives, we're going to summarize what we mean by the word stress. And stress is a massive, massive killer. It causes cancer, heart disease, diabetes, you name it, it causes it. Describe the major components of the organizational stress model. Compare individual, group, and organizational work stressors. Discuss individual and organizational outcomes of stress, and identify variables that moderate the stress process. Give examples of different organizational and individual approaches to stress prevention and management, which is so important. Many organizations, they have wellness programs where they give you money towards a gym, or they have a gym internally. If you look at a company like Google, they have a lot of different gyms and all kinds of exercise options. You can take a bicycle and drive around. You can actually go to the gym there. There's swimming pools there, all kinds of volleyball courts. If you've ever seen pictures of Googleplex, and that's very good because that increases productivity. We're going to compare individual, group, and organizational work stresses, discuss individual organizational outcomes of stress, identify variables that moderate the stress process, and give examples of different organizational individual approaches to stress prevention and management. So we've been talking a lot about stress. So what is stress? Stress for those in the industrialized societies often originates in the organization. Stress that originates elsewhere interacts with and affects workplace behavior and performance. So you could have organizational stress. You have this really sick boss who's always stressing you out, or the job itself is a super stressful job, requires tons of working, in different areas at the same time, a lot of multitasking. Or it could originate from outside of the organization, but actually impact your performance within. So, for example, if a person's having a stressful family situation, somebody's sick, there's a marriage crisis, the person is sick, depression, you name it, then they bring it back to the job. So, you got into a fight with somebody at home. Let's say somebody got into a fight with a child or a spouse. They come to work all wired up. And then, of course, it's kick the dog. The first person you meet is going to be the first person that you basically lash out at. And then that causes all kinds of organizational stress. So stress is an adaptive response moderated by individual differences, a consequences of any action, event, or situation that places special demands on a person, which of course will always create stress. Let's say all of a sudden I throw this crazy difficult assignment at you, write a 50-page paper for your final. I'm kidding. And I can just imagine the looks on your faces. You're all going to turn green. Why? Because I just introduced something, and that is going to cause you to have stress. Many times students have this stress at the beginning of the semester when the information is outlined and people just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get this all done? They start obsessing, start getting nervous. Stressor is a potentially harmful or threatening external event or situation. Perfect example is what we're going now with the whole shelter-in-place business with coronavirus. A lot of stress. People are shut up together, shut into their houses for weeks on end. I could tell you that by being in the house with family members for close to 5 weeks, it can get very, very stressful. You suffer from something called cabin fever, and that's a real thing. So a lot of external things can cause a tremendous amount of stress. Please stop me if you have any questions. So we have stress triggers, work overload or nagging boss, or a nagging coworker. I could tell you about that. Computer problems or time deadlines, of course, cause stress. Downsizing and mergers, even furloughs. Even people that are being furloughed. Anybody know what a furlough means? What is a furlough? Anybody? Furlough is a temporary layoff. In other words, you're being asked. You're not getting paid, but your job is not being eliminated either. It's being suspended, if you will, until the proper time. So people get very stressed about it. Poorly designed jobs where some people do nothing and the few do a lot. Marital disharmony and financial crisis, accelerating rates of change. A lot of things are happening at work too quick, too fast, and of course, world events cause tremendous amounts of stress. So for something to cause stress, it must be seen as a source of threat, challenge, and of course, harm to an individual. Those three things cause people to become stressed. Key factors determine if an experience is likely to cause stress through its importance, the amount of uncertainty that it causes, and of course the duration of it, all of which are happening right now with the COVID virus. A lot of people don't know, some people think it's important to shelter in place. Today I saw there's a growing minority of people that say it's not important anymore and it's important to get out of it. So their level of importance is to stop the status quo. There's a lot of uncertainty. People are afraid. They don't know how long this is going to last. They don't know if, God forbid, there'll be multiple strains. And of course, this will lengthen the amount of shelter in place and of course the duration of it. Stress duration. Acute stress lasts for seconds, hours, or days. Chronic stress may last for months or years, especially if somebody's involved, let's say, in an unhappy marriage or at a bad job. That could really, really wreak havoc on an individual and literally take years off a person's life. Figure 9.1, 3 factors that make an event stressful. How important is the event? I can't afford to be laid off. There are no jobs right now, and I have to pay my bills. So people just cannot fathom saying, God forbid, let's say and I've been in this situation before. I worked for a company. I had this really, really crazy CEO. The way that he would balance the books at the end of the year was he'd hire you at different times of the year for a certain purpose. Let's say there was some sort of inspection that's on its way or something needed to get fixed up. So he'd hire you at an exorbitant salary, draw you in kind of like a Venus flytrap, and then at the end of the year, in order to come out in the black as opposed to the red, he'd fire you. So I didn't know about this practice. I came into work, just honest. I wanted to do a good job. And all of a sudden, every day, every Friday in the month of November, another couple people got laid off. It was frightening. I felt like a soldier in the front lines in a foxhole. And there's a shell that goes off in the foxhole next to me, and my buddies die. And all of a sudden, I start freaking out. When is it going to be my turn? So people are afraid. How much uncertainty surrounds the event? The company isn't telling us anything about the upcoming layoffs, which is very bad. And what is the duration of the event? I hope these layoffs are done quickly so we can focus on our work or finding a new job. Any questions thus far? Okay. Exhibit 9.2, models of stressors and stress outcomes. We can just expand this for a bit and look at it. There are stressors on the individual level: role conflict, role overload, role ambiguity, you know what your job is; group level, managerial behavior, lack of cohesiveness; organizational level, culture, technology; and non-work, elder and child care. A person, God forbid, has an elderly parent who's sick, or a child at home that has special needs; the economy; or lack of mobility. People feel stuck. And of course, that leads into your cognitive appraisals. How do you sum this all up? It leads to stress, which of course is impacted by moderators, individual differences. For example, your age, your gender, your diet. And diet is very important to your stress levels. If you have a good diet, it helps you maintain proper blood sugar. And of course, the stress will be problem-focused coping or emotion-focused coping, which then branches off into your outcomes, which can be behavioral, could be satisfaction, performance, absenteeism or turnover; cognitive, poor decision making, lack of concentration. So that's one of the dead giveaways. If somebody's having an issue, they've been a model employee, all of a sudden they start performing poorly and they start making really stupid mistakes that are not the type of mistakes that they've made. And physiological: increased blood pressure, immune system issues, high cholesterol, coronary heart disease, and gastrointestinal system issues, such as tremendous amount of ulcers and also a lot of acid reflux. I had an employee today at work that had an acid reflux attack. And I don't know if it was precipitated by stress. Maybe it was, and she just didn't want to tell me. It was frightening. We had to do like an EKG on her at work, and I sent her home in a cab. It was quite frightening. And if it's due to stress, I asked her, I said, did anybody say anything mean to you? Did anybody hurt you? I really interviewed her. It's kind of interesting how that story happened on the day that I'm giving this class. It's kind of like an opportune time to discuss that. But definitely one of my questions to that employee who was sick was, were you feeling well? What was going on in your life? Did somebody say something? Did something happen to you? Did somebody embarrass you? Moderators. Okay, so moderators, stress is influenced by individual differences. Age and gender. Definitely genders deal with stress differently. Social support mechanisms. If you have it, it helps you with stress tremendously. If you have a good person to listen to your problems at home, you have a good spouse, a sibling, a parent, a friend who's sympathetic. Your personality, if you're the type of personality that has tough skin and you're like a duck and you let it roll off your back. And of course, heredity. Some people are naturally good at fighting off stress. Some people are very bad at it. I think it's important, just raising children, just a little bit of my sagely advice. I don't think you should coddle children too much, because what ends up happening is they're not going to know how to deal with stress. I'm not saying you should stress your kids out on purpose, but a little amount of stress is good, because as a child, you'll learn how to problem solve and how to figure things out for yourself, which I think is super, super important. Even in the presence of moderators, intervention may be needed. That could be in the form of therapy, some sort of third party that can help you get through. And I will say this, many communities, therapy is looked at as a taboo, or is looked at as, oh man, there's something wrong with you, you're a head case, you need a therapist. That is the furthest from the truth. I think therapy has taken on a new kind of role in today's day and age. I think there's so many people out there looking at it. And I think this all started when we had all these school shootings, all these crazy situations. We started realizing that mental health is not something that should be ignored, especially within an organization. You never want to ignore that, because it'll come back and bite you really badly. What are some of the individual stressors? Role ambiguity. There's nothing worse than being at work and not knowing what your job is. Has anybody ever had that situation? Go to work and you don't know what they expect of you? Ever happened to any of you? Hello? Guys? Did anybody ever have a situation where you just didn't know what was going on at work, or you didn't know what was expected of you, and you kind of felt like stressed out? You kind of felt like, what is it that I need to do? And as a result, you were just, yeah. I had that once with a job where somebody hired me, and he was one of these very eccentric people, very wealthy, very, very eccentric, and he got frustrated with me, but I think it was more frustration of himself, because in his mind, he felt like he was paying me a salary, but I wasn't doing what he wanted. And I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do? I ended up having to figure out for myself things that needed to be done, which is good in a way, because I was able to figure things out for myself. But at many times, I always wonder, was I doing the right thing? Was I pleasing him? Again, also responsibility for people. When you have a lot of people that you're responsible for and their actions reflect on your performance, and that's the unfair aspect of management, that you're held responsible for other people's actions as opposed to just yours. The pace of change, is it happening too quickly? Harassment, is somebody harassing you, whether it's sexual harassment or just harassing you and bothering you? Role overload, you just have too many jobs. And role conflict, you feel like that you're butting heads with someone. Or I've had situations where my boss will tell me to tell another employee of my same level something, like tell them that they're doing this and this wrong, which makes me feel uncomfortable because I'm not their boss. And there's one thing is your boss tells you to tell one of your employees, I mean, not yours that you own them, but the ones that report to you. That's one thing. But when somebody tells you higher up to speak to somebody in your level and tell them to do something wrong, that will make me tremendously feel uneasy. Work overload. It could take the form of qualitative, occurs when people lack the ability needed to complete their jobs, or when performance standards are set too high. So it's frustrating. That's why you have to have realistic expectations. Quantitative, results from having too many things to do or insufficient time to complete a job. I've had bosses that just give you like one thing to do, 5 minutes later another thing to do, 3 minutes later another thing to do, and then they all ask you, why are all three things not done yet? And then you're like, you just assigned me 5 things, each of which can take several hours to do, and you didn't tell me which one you want. You have to say, prioritize and tell me which ones you want done first. And work underload also creates problem. If you're underwhelmed, we've heard of the term being overwhelmed. Here's a term that nobody probably uses. I am underwhelmed. Have you ever heard the term being underwhelmed? Anybody ever hear that term? What underwhelmed means is that you're not challenged to do your job. You're bored. Has anybody ever been bored at work? I'm not talking about occasional. I'm talking about real boredom. Anybody here ever get bored, super bored at work? What happens when you get bored? You feel like, right, which is bad because it makes you feel like you're not performing. So here's some issues: and underload, boredom, decrease in motivation, absenteeism. You don't want to show up to work, apathy. Yeah, not so interested. Um, Optimal stress is high motivation, high energy, sharp perception, calmness, and overload, insomnia, irritability, increased errors, and indecisiveness, especially management. You just don't know what to decide. Insomnia is something that's endemic of what's going on now with the coronavirus. I could tell you last night I had about an hour of sleep, or 2 hours of sleep. I went to bed, it was around 2 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't fall asleep till about 4. I woke up my spouse to have a conversation. She wasn't too happy about it. I was just going out of my mind. So we spoke for a few minutes. I fell asleep. She fell asleep. And then I woke up. It was 6. And I felt like I slept like maybe 2 hours. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I was discussing with someone, and they said it's probably due to some sort of overload. Not really so much at work. Actually, it is work related because I have a lot of coworkers that are not at work. So I'm picking up their slack, and I'm literally like the little Dutch boy holding back the dike, and it's very, very hard. It's very, very frustrating. So it can lead to a lot of stress. The hardiness factor. People with hardiness possess three characteristics. Hardiness meaning that you're strong and you're able to handle things. So people with hardiness possess three characteristics. They believe they can control the events they encounter. In other words, they have a good sense of an internal locus of control. They feel that their actions are direct determinants of whatever the outcomes will be. They're extremely committed to the activities in their lives, and they treat change as a challenge and embrace it. Recognizing stress in employees. What are the telltale signs? New pattern of tardiness or absences. Remember, absences is a dead giveaway. There's something going on. Gregarious employees become withdrawn. Gregarious meaning somebody who's usually friendly. All of a sudden, they start losing their friendliness and they start to withdraw. Normally neat, accurate work becomes messy, incomplete, or sloppy. Also, people's appearances. I don't mean to say this in a bad way. When people start gaining weight and start like looking a little, or you could tell that they're the way that they just their appearance. They don't groom themselves well, or They come in with crumpled clothing. You could tell that there's something going on. People don't just put on 40 pounds in 6 months. There are situations like people put on 30 or 40 pounds. You start wondering, well, if someone's pregnant, that's a good 30 or 40 pounds. But I'm talking about somebody who is, who's just gaining weight. You just have to start asking questions like, is that person okay? Conversely, somebody starts losing weight, and you start wondering, are they sick? Is it people many times because of mental illness, meaning that they're just stressed out, start losing tremendous amounts of weight because you have people that eat, stress eaters, and then you have those that don't eat or starve themselves, so to speak, because they have apathy. They don't feel like eating. Okay? Good decision makers start making bad decisions or seems unable to make them at all. Easygoing employee who gets along well with others becomes irritable and discourteous. They start being mean and nasty. And normally well-groomed employees neglect his or her appearance. They start like wondering, they used to come in with this beautiful suit and tie or high heels and a nice business suit and a nice amount of makeup, and they did their hair and they look very presentable. All of a sudden they come in with a hoodie and, all messy and all, slovenly. You start wondering what's going on. Significant stressors, participation, intra-group relations between groups or within the group, organizational politics, of course, the culture shift, downsizing will lead to tremendous amounts of stress, especially when people don't know what's going on. People start underperforming, people start sabotaging. It's a terrible thing. Inadequate career development opportunities. In other words, you feel stuck in the rut at work. You feel like you're never going to advance. Lack of performance feedback. People don't know where they stand. And non-work stressors, things that are not related to work, such as elder and child care, taking college classes. I hope I'm not stressing you guys out too much. I hope balancing family work, economy, volunteer work, and of course, health problems, which all impact. And again, what we're going through with the coronavirus definitely has a lot of these non-work stressors, adding problems to those people that are still working from home and or people working in the office. And, I find a very interesting dichotomy here. I have some departments that are working from home, and I work in a healthcare setting. And then I have the healthcare workers and the support people like myself who are coming in every day. We get very angry when the people staying at home start asking us to do stuff and get irritable when we ask them to do stuff. We start saying, hey, you guys are all safe, tucked away in your houses, and we're out here in the front lines risking our lives every single day. So that creates a kind of a stressful back and forth within the organization. And of course, elder and child care, taking care of the people that you love. If you're worried about them, then of course your head is not going to be there. Let's move on to the next slide. Cognitive appraisal. Perceptual process of evaluating a situation explains why one person's interpretation of stresses is different from another's. So that could stem from primary appraisal, categorizing a stressor as positive, negative, or meaningless, and secondary, determination of whether something can be done to reduce the stress. So the first thing is you basically have to prioritize it, whether it's weak, medium, or very strong, and then you got to figure out how am I going to reduce that. Okay, so in coping with stress, we look at problem-focused, or you look at the emotional focus. Stress outcomes, blue-collar workers, meaning people that work in more hands-on physical jobs, let's say mechanics, for example. Blue-collar workers report the highest effects of stress. White-collar workers report the lowest stress. It doesn't mean that white-collar workers don't have stress, but blue-collar workers do have a lot of stress. Many times it's because the work itself is physically taxing and sometimes not as well paying as some white-collar jobs. Skilled blue-collar workers report fewer stressors than their unskilled counterparts. Why? Because the pay is higher. When you're working in a minimum wage job or a low-paying job, that itself is a stressor because you feel like no matter what, how hard, you feel like I worked so hard and what am I getting in return? So you kind of feel betrayed. You feel taken advantage of. You feel like almost like you're inadequate because is this the best that I could do? Is this what I've amounted to? People start feeling like that. And all workers report that job performance is affected by these stress outcomes. Individual outcomes of stress. Stress can produce various psychological consequences, including anxiety, frustration, apathy, just losing your spirit. Of course, lowered self-esteem, which will cause you to make a lot of mistakes. It can lead to aggression, becoming an aggressive individual, and of course lead to depression, which can spill over into your personal life, and of course affect your marriage and your other relationships. Depression, some key facts. Depression has serious consequences. Depression costs about $51 billion a year in medical bills, lost productivity, and absenteeism. Tremendous amount of money lost. The World Health Organization, which I believe is one of the most worthless UN, I believe the whole UN is a worthless organization. You could quote me on that. I don't really care. And the WHO is also a front for terrorist rogue countries. I'm going to say that straight up. The Communist Party in China is I think they're terrorists. They terrorize their own people. And of course, they've terrorized the world. So this World Health Organization predicts that by 2030, more people in the world will be affected by depression than any other health problem. That I will agree with them. But I think a lot of it has to do with economic greed. Depression is hard to detect, especially within the current healthcare system. I think that's the case because there's very little, in my opinion, being done in the realm of mental health. And I think more needs to be done because a lot of these crazy situations where you have, for example, in my days in the late 90s, you had the Columbine shooting. The kids that were involved in the shooting were depressed kids. These are kids that felt that they were being taken advantage of. These are kids that felt that they were basically being marginalized. And we have this tendency to ignore these important factors, which is a terrible thing. Please, anybody have any questions thus far? Anybody have any questions? Okay. All right. I guess I'm being clear. Or you're too tired to ask questions, but it's not late. The sun is still out, as you can see. But all right. Stress outcomes, behavioral accident proneness. Well, yeah. Impulse behavior, alcohol and drug abuse, definitely. An explosive temper. And alcoholism is becoming something that's very, very popular now amongst the youth. It could be cognitive, poor concentration, which sometimes just could be a problem with chemical imbalance in the brain. They're just not able to focus, inability to make good or any decisions, mental blocks, decreased attention span, and physiological increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure, which is dangerous, can cause stroke over time, hot and cold flashes, high blood glucose levels, elevated stomach acid production, and things of that. Then you have burnout. I've definitely experienced burnout many, many times. Unfortunately, I remember one job where I was there for over 8 years. I think I burnt out after 5. So I was basically burning for 3 years. And it's just amazing that I was able to do my job. I remember that job. It was very, very hard, physical job, emotional. And I definitely burnt out and continued to burn out till something better came by, thank God. A psychological process resulting from work stress that results in emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and feeling of decreased accomplishment. Just talk about depersonalization. I want to just talk about that for a minute. Pull up my email and hold on a second. Depersonalization. Depersonalization is a state in which one's thoughts and feelings seem unreal or not to belong to oneself, or in which one loses all sense of identity. And when you lose your identity, what ends up happening? It's going to be a massive issue, and it's a problem. It's going to cause you not to be productive. More on burnout indicators: emotional exhaustion, feel drained by work, feel fatigued in the morning, frustrated, do not want to work with other people. Depersonalization, have become calloused by job, treat others like objects. I have this woman at work who just sometimes these are my employees, my billers, or my nurses, things like that. People don't like it. Do not care what happens to other people, feel other people blame you, they become very defensive, low personal accomplishment, cannot deal with problems effectively, do not have a positive influence on others, cannot understand others' problems or identify with them, and no longer feel exhilarated by your job. So you're kind of burnt out and you don't have that same feeling you did in the beginning. A prerequisite for burnout is high involvement in identification with or commitment to one's job. So, meaning you have to have been highly engaged in order to burn out. You can't be burnt out by never having been burning to begin with. You know what I mean? Individual variables make burnout more likely. Women are more likely to burn out than men. Young workers are more susceptible than older ones. Older ones know how to manage their pace better. Unmarried workers are more likely to burn out than married ones. Married workers, assuming that their marriage is good, they're able to help each other through difficult times. Factors that contribute to burnout: high levels of work overload, dead-end jobs, excessive red tape and paperwork, tedious paperwork, poor feedback and communication, role conflict and ambiguity, difficult interpersonal relationships, reward systems not tied to performance, which kind of make things look, arbitrary and unfair. Myths about burnout. These myths must be dispelled before staff burnout can be reduced. When a client says jump, the only answer is how high. Not really. Sometimes clients are unreasonable, and sometimes bosses are unreasonable. And you don't always, I always say this to employees: never show what you can do in the beginning, not everything. Don't show them everything, because when you set the expectation too high, that new high, super high level will be expected of you all the time. And your performance at that high level will not be viewed as high performance, but will be viewed as your minimum performance. And then if that's the most you can give, then you're always going to be looked at as being insufficient, as putting in insufficient effort. Reining in employees' workloads will turn them into slackers. So in other words, if I make it too easy for them, people are going to become lazy, right? If employees are working themselves into the ground, it's because it's their fault. They don't know how to properly pace themselves. Again, shifting the blame to the victim. Organizational consequence of stress. Stress costs organizations $300 billion annually, which results into poor decision-making, decreased creativity, mental and physical health problems, lost work time and turnover, increased health insurance premiums, job dissatisfaction and sabotage, and customer dissatisfaction. Stress moderators. Moderate is a condition, behavior, or characteristic that intensifies or weakens the relationship between stressors, stress, and consequences. Stress moderators: personality, type A behavior pattern. Type A person, the person gets explosive, the guy that starts honking the horn before we even, get anything done. And of course, social support is very, very important. If you don't have it, you're in a lot of trouble. These personality traits, we spoke about this in Principles of Management, and of course, anything we speak about in Principles of Management will definitely bleed into this course. There's different personality types: agreeableness, trying to get along, conscientiousness, openness to the experience, extroversion, being an extrovert, and emotional stability or the lack thereof. Now let's look at a type A behavior pattern, otherwise known as a TABP. A type A individual struggles to get as many things done as possible in the shortest time period. They always have this urgency to get everything done right away. They're aggressive, ambitious, competitive, and forceful. There's nothing wrong with being ambitious, but when it's aggressive, forceful, people start hating you for that. Speaks explosively, rushes others to finish what they are saying. All right, come on, get to the point. Yeah, come on. I hate that. I used to have some bosses like that. Like you wouldn't be able to have a minute to even think of it, because you'd be always feeling like they're rushing you to just make it pointer. Yes, and therefore. I'm like, okay, relax, take it easy. It kind of throws you off kilter. Is impatient, hates to wait, considers waiting a waste of precious time. Is preoccupied with deadlines and is work-oriented. Is always in a struggle with people, things, or events, always fighting, and displays or hides anger and hostility towards others. So again, it's either that they're showing their cards or they're harboring this anger inside, and you could feel it. You could feel that heat. A type B behavior pattern. The person with type B generally feels no pressing conflict with either time or persons, and is mainly free of the type A behavioral patterns that we spoke about. Social support: comfort, assistance, or information received through formal or informal contacts with individuals or groups linked to health, illness, and stress. Forms of social support: you can have emotional, appraisal, people giving you feedback, and of course informational, which is really a part of that whole concept. Social support: people, whether at or outside the workplace. Social support is an effective stress moderator, provides a degree of predictability, which humans crave, even though people say it's predictable, it's boring, but people like a certain sense of boring. People like to have a certain sense of predictability. Purpose and hope in upsetting and threatening situations. Moving along, stress prevention and management is an astute manager never ignores. In other words, you as a manager can't just be walking around and in la la land and spacing out and not paying attention. You've got to look at absenteeism. You have an employee that's never absent, or you have a group of employees that have fantastic attendance, all of a sudden start calling in sick. And we're not talking about during the flu season when everyone's getting sick. We're talking about when we're in a world when things are going well, and all of a sudden everybody starts calling in sick. Workplace drug abuse, which is scary. Decline in performance, hostile and belligerent employees. People start fighting with each other. Reduced quality of production, and any signs that goals are not being met should be dead giveaways that there's something bad going on. Stress prevention and management. Let's just expand this slide. Okay. Organizational stress management and prevention programs targeted at work and non-work stressors such as workload, job conditions. These are the things that it tries to mitigate. Also, that spills into employee perception of experience of stress and the outcomes of stress, your physiological, emotional, behavioral. You've got to keep your minds on all of that. And all that, the physiological, emotional, behavioral, come from workload, job conditions. Let's say the place is dirty, the place is not heated well, or is too hot in the summer. A perfect example are the warehouses at Amazon, where employees are forced to work, not allowed to go to the bathroom. It's like being in a gulag. It's like being in a prison camp. And of course, having to deal with a ridiculous amount of heat. A lot of times I've heard that Amazon will have a lot of ambulance calls to a lot of their warehouses because people just like conk out on the job. Quite frightening. Stress prevention and management to create a supportive work environment. Set an example by being a source of support for others, particularly subordinates. Be a supportive manager. Let people feel safe around you. And again, I stressed this in the beginning of this talk about the circle of safety. Encourage open communication and maximum exchange of information. There's nothing worse than having a boss that you can't approach and that you're afraid that you're going to set him off by saying something. You should have an open experience, an open feeling with your boss that you could speak about almost anything without having to fear the repercussions. Provide timely performance feedback in an encouraging, non-threatening manner, of course. In other words, constructive criticism, not destructive criticism. Have senior members of the work group mentor the less experienced. Let them become their proteges, quote unquote. You have, your teacher and your student kind of situation. And maintain or increase work group cohesion. How do you do that? Through team building. You want to be able to build teams by promoting that group cohesion, by making people feel comfortable with each other. And how do you feel comfortable with each other? Well, if you know your boss is a comfortable kind of person, you could confide in them, then it makes the entire work environment that much more pleasant and that much more inviting, and people will feel more comfortable, speak up, and of course, ultimately be creative and have fantastic job performance. Stress prevention and management. Stress prevention focuses on controlling or eliminating stressors. Stress management helps people reduce or cope with stress that is being experienced. Stress management program targets corrective actions, train workers to manage and cope with stress, breathing exercises and how to talk out their problems, redesign work to minimize stressors. Maybe look at job descriptions and look at people that are being overworked and people that are being underworked, underwhelmed, overwhelmed, and come up with a fair formula to kind of spread the wealth, so to speak. Create more flexible work hours, let people able to work from home. I would love to work from home on a Friday. I don't have to rush home. I could work till almost an hour before Shabbos or an hour and a half for Shabbos because I don't have to run anywhere. It would be a great thing. Pay more attention to work-life balance. Having a boss that understands that you need a vacation, you need to spend time with your kids, better communication and team building practices, better feedback on performance and expectations, and improve the fit between the person and the job. Make sure that when you hire people